The bell above the door gave a short, flat ring, and nobody paid it much attention. It was a slow Tuesday afternoon at Dalton's Firearms. The kind of afternoon where the hours stretch it long and the only real noise was the hum of the overhead lights and the occasional creak of the floorboards when someone shifted their weight. 3 young salesmen stood behind the counter. Cole Merritt, the tallest, was in the middle of telling a story that wasn't as funny as he thought it was. Brandon Hayes was laughing anyway. Tyler Owens was pretending to organize a display of gun cleaning kits he had already organized twice that day. The man who stepped through the door didn't look like much, and that was exactly the problem. He was somewhere in his early 60s, maybe older. It was hard to tell with men who had spent their lives outdoors. He wore a fitted canvas jacket the color of dried earth, heavy denim jeans with a worn crease at the knees, and boots that had seen so many seasons of mud and rain they had taken on a texture all their own. His face was lined and weathered, his hair silver gray and close-cut. His hands, as he pushed the door shut behind him, were wide and rough, the kind of hands that belonged to a man who fixed things instead of outsourcing them. He walked toward the counter without looking around. No browsing, no hesitation, just a slow, measured walk, the kind that carried its own weight in a way most people didn't notice right away, but felt. Cole noticed him halfway across the floor and straightened up, still half smiling from his own story. "Afternoon," he said. "Help you find something?" "I'm looking for a sidearm," the man said. His voice was even, unhurried. "Handgun, home defense, something I can rely on." Cole glanced at Brandon. Just a flicker, the kind of glance that carries an entire conversation in half a second. Brandon pressed his lips together to keep from smiling. "Home defense," Cole repeated, leaning forward on the counter with both forearms. "Right. You got something specific in mind, or are you just getting started?" "I know what I want," the man said. "Mid-size frame, good trigger pull. Nothing fancy." Cole tilted his head. "You shoot much?" "Some," the man said. "Some." Cole echoed the word the way people do when they want the person across from them to feel small. He glanced sideways again. "Right, well, we got plenty of options. Though if you're not real experienced, I'd probably steer you towards something more entry-level. Less to think about." He paused, letting the next line land like he'd been waiting for it. "We used to carry some great tractor accessories too, but that's a different aisle." He grinned. Brandon laughed out loud. Tyler turned away. A couple of other customers nearby looked up. One older woman near the ammunition rack frowned slightly and looked away. A heavy-set man in a flannel shirt near the rifle display, Gerald Wade, though no one there knew his name, stopped what he was doing and looked over. The man at the counter didn't react. Not a flicker. He just looked at Cole with the same steady, unhurried expression he'd walked in with. Then he looked at Brandon, then Tyler, like he was taking inventory of something. "Is Ray Dalton in today?" he asked. Cole blinked. The grin faded just slightly. "He's the owner, yeah. He's out right now. Should be back later." The man nodded once, slow and deliberate, the way a person nods when they've just confirmed something they already suspected. "I'll wait," he said simply. He turned, walked to a plain wooden chair near the front window and sat down. He didn't take out a phone. He didn't pick up a magazine from the rack beside him. He simply sat with his hands resting on his knees and his eyes calm, looking out at the parking lot like a man who had learned a long time ago that patience wasn't a weakness. It was a weapon. Cole watched him for a second, then leaned toward Brandon. "Think he knows Ray?" Brandon shrugged. "Old guy probably bought a shotgun here once and thinks that counts as a relationship." They both laughed quietly. Tyler said nothing but didn't stop them. If you have ever watched someone absorb mockery without reacting, not because they didn't hear it, not because they didn't understand it, but because they had simply grown past the need to respond to it, then you already know what the next 30 minutes looked like in that shop. Jack Turner, because that was his name, though no one there had thought to ask, sat in that chair with the same stillness he had carried through the door. Minutes passed, 10, then 20. Cole told another story. Brandon restocked a shelf. Tyler finally moved on to organizing ammunition boxes. The ordinary noise of an ordinary afternoon filled the room. Gerald Wade, over by the rifle display, hadn't moved on. He was 58 years old, built like a man who had once been in very good shape and hadn't entirely let it go. He'd spent 20 years in the United States Army, 2 tours overseas, 1 desk assignment he tried not to think about, and a medical discharge at 41 that still bothered his left shoulder when the weather changed. He ran a hardware store now 3 towns over. He didn't come into Dalton's often, but today he had needed to pick up a specific scope mount, and he had needed to get out of the house. And this place was quiet enough on a Tuesday that he could do both. Or it had been quiet, until something about the man in the chair near the window had made Gerald go completely still. He couldn't have explained it if someone had asked him to. It wasn't anything specific, not the posture, not the face, not the hands. It was something under all of it, a quality. The kind of presence that people who had served in certain places recognized in each other without ever having to say so out loud. Gerald studied the man for a long moment. Then he looked at the 3 young men behind the counter, who were now openly glancing toward the chair and smirking between themselves. Gerald Wade set down the scope mount he was holding. His jaw tightened slightly. He said nothing, but he watched. It was about 35 minutes after Jack had first walked in that the bell above the door rang again. Ray Dalton came through it quickly, the way a man comes through a door when he has somewhere else he needs to be in 20 minutes. He was 44 years old, built wide and solid, with dark hair going gray at the temples and the kind of direct, assessing eyes that came from years of making fast decisions under pressure. He had a paper bag under one arm and a set of keys in his other hand, and he was already scanning the room the way he always did when he walked in. Checking the floor, checking the counter, checking his employees. Cole started to say something. "Hey, boss, heads up. There's an old farmer who's been camping in your chair for half an hour waiting on." Ray stopped walking. The paper bag shifted under his arm. His keys went quiet. He was looking across the room at the chair near the front window, and the expression on his face had changed so completely and so suddenly that Cole actually stopped talking mid-sentence. Ray's face had gone somewhere else entirely. Not pale, not alarmed. Something deeper than either of those things. Recognition. The kind that hits you in the chest before your mind has fully caught up. "Boss?" Cole said carefully. "You good?" Ray didn't answer. He walked forward, slowly, the way a person walks when they are managing something internally that the people around them cannot see. He crossed the floor of his own shop like he was moving through a memory, and he stopped about 3 feet from the chair near the window. Jack Turner looked up. For a moment, neither of them said a word. The eye contact between them was the kind that exists in its own language, built from shared experience, from things that happened in the dark and the dust and the noise, from moments that never fully leave a person, no matter how many years of ordinary life pile up on top of them. Ray straightened slightly. His voice, when it came, was lower than usual and very deliberate. "Mr. Turner," he said. "Sir, I didn't. Nobody told me you were coming." The 3 salesmen went completely still. Cole looked from Ray to the old man in the chair and back again, something shifting uncomfortably behind his eyes. "Wait," he said slowly. "You actually know him?" Ray turned his head, and the look he gave Cole was not angry, not loud. It was worse than both of those things. It was the look of a man deciding how much to say, and exactly how to say it, because he understood that the words were going to land hard, and he wanted them to land in the right place. "Cole," Ray said quietly, "what did you say to this man when he walked in?" Cole's jaw moved. Nothing came out for a second. We were just joking around. We didn't." "What did you say?" It wasn't a question anymore. The whole room felt it. Even the older woman near the ammunition rack had turned around fully now. Gerald Wade had not moved an inch. Brandon looked at his shoes. Tyler had gone the color of old chalk. Cole swallowed. I made a comment about the feed store and tractor parts. We didn't mean anything serious by it. He stopped. Something in Ray's expression had made the rest of the sentence fall apart before it reached his mouth. Ray looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Brandon. Then Tyler. Then he exhaled through his nose, set the paper bag down on the counter, and turned back toward Jack. "Sir," he said, "I am sorry about that." Jack looked at him steadily. "Don't worry about it, Ray," he said. "Boys are young. Young doesn't cover it," Ray said. He walked around behind the counter and stood facing his 3 employees with his hands flat on the glass. His voice was controlled, but something underneath it had edges. "You want to know who you just laughed at?" he said. None of them answered. "In 2007, Ray began, and the way he said it, the year landing like the first line of something important, made Brandon look up. I was 23 years old, running logistics convoy through some of the worst terrain I have ever seen in my life. 5 vehicles, 26 men, 2 of them less than a year out of training. We hit a stretch of road that turned into a nightmare within 10 minutes. Lead vehicle disabled. Secondary route cut off. Communications barely holding. We're exposed, we're not moving, and the situation is getting worse by the minute because everyone is reacting and nobody is thinking." Ray paused. "I was reacting," he said. "I'll own that. I was 23 and I was scared and I was loud and I was making it worse." He glanced toward Jack for just a second before continuing. "There was a man attached to our unit. Not young, not loud. He was standing 20 feet away from the disabled vehicle, and he was looking at the terrain like he was reading a map only he could see. I walked over to him and I said, 'We need to move. What do we do?' And he looked at me and he said, and I have never forgotten this, 'Stop making noise and start making decisions.'" Cole's jaw had gone slack. "He walked that situation back from the edge," Ray said. "Not with equipment we didn't have, not with backup that wasn't coming. With what was in front of him. He looked at ground most people would have given up on, and he found a way through it. A different way. Not the way we came, not the way we planned. A third way that none of us had seen because we were too busy panicking to look." Gerald Wade, across the room, unfolded his arms. His expression had changed completely. "We got every single one of those 26 men out," Ray said. 6 hours. No casualties. Because one person in that situation refused to stop thinking when everything around him was falling apart. He stopped. Let the silence hold. That person is sitting in the chair near your window that you just spent the last half hour making jokes about. The shop was absolutely silent. Cole felt something move through him that he did not have a word for. Not quite shame, though shame was part of it. Something heavier. Something that had to do with the fact that he had looked at a man and decided who he was inside of 10 seconds, and had been so completely, so embarrassingly wrong. Brandon made a sound that wasn't quite a word. It was Gerald Wade who spoke next from across the room. His voice was steady and carried clearly. "I spent 20 years in the Army," he said, "and the men who scared me the most were never the ones making the most noise." He looked at the 3 salesmen. They were always the ones who could go quiet when everything went loud. He looked at Jack. "I don't know you, sir, but I recognize you." Jack Turner looked at Gerald for a moment. Then he gave a single small nod. The kind of nod that passes between people who understand something without needing to explain it. Cole stepped out from behind the counter. His face was not composed. It was doing something real, something unguarded, which was the most honest thing about him that afternoon. "Sir," he said to Jack. His voice cracked slightly on the word. "I owe you an apology. A real one. Not because my boss is standing right there, but because I was wrong, and I was disrespectful, and you didn't deserve a single word of it." Jack looked at him. The same calm, the same steadiness that had never left his face for a moment since he walked through that door. "I appreciate that," Jack said simply. "Can I ask you something?" Cole said. Jack waited. "Why did you stay? After what we said, why didn't you just walk out?" Jack was quiet for a moment. He looked at the window, then back at Cole. "Because walking out would have made it your problem," he said. "Staying made it mine. And I've never been in the habit of leaving a problem for someone else to carry." Nobody had anything to say to that. Ray reached under the counter and placed a handgun on the glass. Clean, well-maintained, exactly the mid-size frame Jack had described when he first walked in. A firearm for a man who already knew what he wanted and had come in with a specific purpose and no interest in being upsold. Jack stood, walked to the counter, and picked it up. The room watched him. The way his hands moved told the whole story. No adjustment period, no figuring it out. Just immediate, quiet authority. The grip, the check of the slide, the way his eyes moved over it with calm, total familiarity. This was not a man who had shot some. This was a man for whom handling a firearm was as ordinary and practiced as anything else he did with his hands, which were the hands of someone who had spent his life solving problems that other people couldn't. "This'll do," Jack said. Ray nodded once. "I know it will." While Ray handled the paperwork, Gerald Wade walked across the store and stopped a few feet from Jack. He extended his hand. "Gerald Wade," he said. "Army Infantry." Jack shook it. "Jack Turner, you'd know the unit?" Gerald looked at him for a moment. Then something shifted in his face. Real recognition this time, the kind connected to a specific name, a specific story. "You're the one they wrote about," Gerald said quietly, "in the after-action. I read that report when I was still in. I didn't know your name, but I knew the story." He paused. "I had no idea you were a farmer." "Farmers were soldiers long before soldiers were anything else," Jack said. Gerald let out a long breath. "Yes, sir," he said. "They were." Jack signed the paperwork, capped the pen, and set it back exactly where he had picked it up from. He took the small lockbox Ray set beside the case, nodded once, and turned toward the door. Cole stepped forward one more time. He didn't have a speech ready. He just stood there with his hands at his sides and his face open, in the way that very young people's faces go open when they have just learned something that will take years to fully understand. "Thank you for staying," he said. Jack paused, looked at him. "Take care of yourself," he said. "And the next time somebody walks through a door that you didn't expect, give them a second before you decide who they are." He pushed through the door and was gone. The bell rang once and went quiet. Ray stood behind his counter and looked at his 3 employees for a long moment. "Every person who comes through that door," he said. "Every single one. You don't know what they've survived. You don't know what they've carried or what they've sacrificed or what they've done so that somebody else could come home. So until you know their story, you treat them like their story matters." He paused. "Because it does." Cole, Brandon, and Tyler nodded, all 3 of them without hesitation. The next morning, a small framed sign went up on the wall above the counter. Ray had written it himself on a plain card in clean, straight letters. "Respect walks in before the story does." Treat it that way. Customers would read it in passing, most of them. Just words on a wall. They would look at it for a second and move on. But the 3 men behind that counter would carry it differently, because they had watched the proof of it walk through their door on a slow Tuesday afternoon in worn boots, ask one quiet question, and sit down to wait without needing to be anything other than exactly what he was. And the whole room had changed before he said another word. If this story hit you the way it hit me, subscribe. There are more people like Jack Turner in this world than most of us will ever know, and every single one of their stories deserves to be told.